Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be covering penetration testing, what it is, why is it important. For any of you joining for the first time, my name is Jerry Craig. I'm the CISO for Ntiva. My background here again, for anyone that's probably already heard this 100 times, is prior active duty Marine DoD contractor, and then a lot of time in the healthcare space. So today we're going to focus on a few items. First and foremost, what is pen testing, penetration testing, pen testing, however you want to call it. Why is it important? We'll cover some of the testing methods and types that are available, and then probably spend more time on the issues and limitations and cost components. One of the things that I myself find is when I go to a webinar, someone might bring up a topic and I want to know how much it costs. And when we get into the cost side of it, I'll try to give you a broad range. But as you'll see through the limitations and the different cost components, there won't be a way to give you a specific cost, but you'll get a general idea of what things are and why they cost what they cost, and give you a better way to make a decision that, if this is something you want to do or something you have to do, and then how to proceed. And then, as always, feel free to put questions in our chat. I will open that up on another screen that I have in case you guys post anything. And for that, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so what is it? So first and foremost, it's a simulated attack against your network. The whole point here when you do a penetration test is to find out if someone were attacking me, would they be successful? How would they gain access? What systems would they use? What type of attack would be successful? So in the broadest sense, when you pay for a pen test, you want to try to cover as many of these categories as possible. Now, again, when we get into the cost components, you'll see where there is a limitation there. So it's not going to be, I'm testing for everything out there. It would take far too long and cost way too much money, but we're going to go over some of the basics as well as the things that you can do to prevent yourself from being exploited in either a penetration test or the actual attack. It's also a reconnaissance exercise. So one of the points of a pen test is to try to see, can I determine more about the organization? Typically, a pen tester or an attacker might spend some time researching your organization. So if you're in the healthcare space, for example, they may have an interest in getting a hold of PHI and PII. If you're credit card space, maybe they want your data because they have identity theft as their #1 motivator. So first and foremost, they're going to do some research and some reconnaissance. The web is going to give them plenty of information about your organization, especially if you have a website saying, here's what we do, here's our story. They're going to use social media, other things to see, can I target key players in the organization? LinkedIn, for example, who are your C-suite, who are the people who are going to have the most vital information. They're going to try to gather as much of that, and then they're going to use the pen test to gather even more. And depending on how they perform the pen test, they could go very slow. The attacker, however they perform the reconnaissance, they could go very slow, hoping to not set off any alarms or bells within your organization, but slowly gather information and see if they can piece together what systems you're using, what operating systems you're running, how old are they patched, those kinds of things. In a pen test, though, we don't have the time to sit there for weeks and months doing this, trying to evade our security products and services and personnel. So they're going to spend probably a couple days, anywhere from 1 to 5 days is likely the average, maybe the out course of 2 weeks, and they're going to gather as much as they can. The organization might be aware of this taking place, or it might not even be shared with the organization. When you have an in-house security team, for example, it's often not shared with the organization because you want to see how well your own security team is doing to, one, catch this and block the tester. They're going to try and scan and analyze findings. So a vulnerability scan, a port scan are common things that are going to come up. That's going to give them some more reconnaissance information, help them narrow down what types of attacks will be successful. For example, if they find out that you're running Microsoft SQL, they may try to attack SQL. If they find that you don't have it, they don't need to waste their time trying to attack SQL because there's no system there for them to attack. Similar things happen with like operating systems. Are you running a version of Linux? Are you running Apple? Are you running Windows? And hey, is it Windows 2007 or is it Windows 2010? Those are going to make a difference in how they structure their attack. So the initial scan and analysis from a pen test perspective is going to help narrow down and save you time and money so that you're only trying to exploit those applicable systems. It also can serve as a means of validating security control, deployment, and effectiveness. So one of the things that happens in security programs and compliance programs in general is we spend time and money to develop a solution, to deploy the solution, implement it, and maintain it. But then we don't really know if the solution's producing the results or the desired results that we paid for. And if it is, the pen test is a great way to show, hey, the money I spent was really good. It stopped this attack from being even possible or successful. And it's a way to show ROI back to your organization. The negative side of it is it could show that things aren't implemented properly or you have partial coverage. It's fairly common in enterprise spaces to buy a tool, deploy it to some percentage of the organization, run into some delays or some roadblocks, and never go back and finish it. So depending on which tool, you may have 20% penetration on one, 50% on another, 80 on another. And something like a pen test can go and point that out for you so that you know to go back and revisit and make sure these tools are deployed holistically. Last but not least, we want to talk about security, not just compliance. It's a roadmap for better security posture. So if you know where you can be exploited, it's then easy to say, what do I have to do to remediate this? In some cases, it might be a configuration change on a piece of software you already own. Others, it might be updating a piece of software. Others, it might be remediating vulnerabilities that were leading the pen tester to be able to exploit you. So either way, the findings of the test is going to be critical to determining your path forward for both better compliance and better security. But why is it really important? And I want to split this into two things because terms are interchanged frequently in the security field, and they don't mean the same thing. Security is definitely different than compliance. In security, we're talking about how secure is something, whereas compliance, how likely are we to pass an audit? Both are important. There's overlap between the two, but they have a different set of results and functions and purposes. On the security side, we're really looking into the visibility of the exploitable weaknesses. So when you run a vulnerability scan, the scan's going to come back and tell you where you're vulnerable. But one of the common things that happens, at least at the enterprise level, where resources are not sufficient to patch everything, there'd be too many maintenance windows, there'd be a lot of downtime, for example, is that when you present someone with your vulnerability scan report, they'll say, I know that this came back as a critical vulnerability or a high vulnerability, but I don't feel that it's actually high because. And in some cases, they're correct. This machine is not accessible from the internet. Only one account has access. You have to go through MFA, and they give you all the compensating controls that make the vulnerability a lower severity in their mind than what the scanner is saying. And all of that is accurate. The problem, though, with the argument is, will you be exploited? Can you be exploited? And how will you be exploited? If it turns out through a pen test that an external attacker cannot exploit that weakness because they're external, then that's a valid argument. If they can exploit it, though, then your argument kind of falls apart. One of the goals that a lot of internal IT teams have and security teams is to say, we want to make it to where we won't be exploited externally, but if you had internal access to our network, okay, then it's possible you could. That's kind of the first barrier they're putting up. But all that means really to you guys who are listening is if someone gets a hold of one of my user accounts that potentially can be elevated to an admin level, they hack one of our email accounts, a system account, now they are internal. If they can come plug into your network in an office or hack into your Wi-Fi system, can they get access? At that point, they're no longer external, and those exploitable weaknesses take on more importance. So we want to see what can be exploited, how it can be exploited, how long it will take. We also want to see what that impact is to the business. And whenever possible, you want to calculate real dollars because business people speak in dollars, not high risk, low risk, but it's not always possible. You might have to go and say, look, the risk is that if someone got access to our network, it would take them about 3 days to hack us based on this weakness. And based on the test, we're not even sure that our security team would detect it. And then you calculate what would that downtime equate to? What would it cost you? Would you be fined from a compliance perspective? Calculate those impacts and say, is it worth spending this number of dollars in time, resources, and solutions to prevent this scenario? And in some cases, you'll find, for example, that you might have to spend $100,000 to avoid a $10,000 attack. Most companies that I'm aware of would say that's not worth the money spent, and they can make a good argument and justify that from a legal liability standpoint. But if for a couple hours of work, you could avoid $100,000 worth of fines and business reputation loss, e-commerce loss from a lack of sales, et cetera, there's a pretty good argument that it's worth your time and money. And then once you make all of these recommendations, you get buy-off from the organization, someone's going to go and remediate them or tell you they've remediated them. How do you validate that? Sometimes people will give you screenshots saying, here's what I did, but you don't truly know that that solved the problem and that they do it across all of your systems. So a pen test is a great way to go back and validate the effectiveness of that remediation effort and make sure that it was complete. Because again, they could do 80% of the network, run into a problem in a maintenance cycle, say, I'll take care of it next month. And next month, the new crisis comes up and they forget about it. On the compliance side, though, you're looking at more contractual and insurance requirements. So many of you are probably either have already bought cyber insurance, you're looking at cyber insurance, maybe you've gotten a quote, you've got clients that you work with whose their cyber insurance providers are asking you to fill out documents. And a typical question will be, do you get an annual third-party pen test? Do you do any pen testing? And on the third-party part, especially for anybody who's working with an MSP, the MSP can serve as a third party depending on what you're talking about. If, for example, and I use Ntiva here, if Ntiva is not providing you with certain IT or security components because you do it yourself, you outsource to another company, then even though we might be your MSP, we can serve as a third party. Now, if we're pen testing our own security team's efforts, okay, we're not an unbiased third party. However, most contractual and insurance requirements aren't going to require unbiased third party. Most, at least today, will just say, do you do annual pen testing? And the answer then is still yes, if you're buying that service. The other thing is, don't feel as if whatever MSP you're with wouldn't be honest, because if the MSP, and again, I use Ntiva as an example, if we're recommending solutions to fix vulnerabilities and weaknesses, and especially exploitable weaknesses in your environment, and you're turning us down, we have no reason to go and cover those up in a pen test. The pen test is going to prove once again that the services we're trying to offer to you are valuable. And this is evidence that by not subscribing to them, you can be hacked because our test was successful. So I would not turn away any result and just assume that it would be biased in any way, because that's likely not the case. But again, just be careful, because if you do outsource your security, it's possible that someone would suppress results to make it look as if they're doing a better job. That's always got to be on the back of your mind. And the other thing that's great about this from a compliance perspective is if you're in a position where you bring these things to leadership and you're not getting buy-off on either IT refreshes, security product deployments, whatever, and you know they're valuable, this test is a great way to justify and secure that funding. Again, as long as you can calculate the impact to the business, it's very easy for someone to sign up and say, yes, go spend the money. One example I'll use is with a healthcare provider before, didn't want to spend a bunch of money on security products because they weren't 100% sure that they would need them. They thought maybe I won't get attacked. It was also hard to prove your ROI, because for security, as long as you're not being attacked, that is your ROI. But yet they had, brick fascia falling off the front of their building, and it was very easy for them to calculate, if the brick hits a person, I get sued for $10 million. Now, what's the cost of fixing the brick? As long as the cost of fixing the brick is less than $10 million, I'm saving money. So there are very simple use cases where business folks can calculate impact to business, and they'll give you the money. On the security side, again, it's a little more difficult. Hopefully the pen test can help provide that. If nothing else, it can provide the how difficult was it to hack you? And if we can do it with a set of basic tools, imagine what a hacker could do when they have more time, money, and resources. Again, they may take months for something we're trying to accomplish in 2 days. let's talk about some testing methods and types. So I apologize for some of the graphics, but they're what I could find in stock photos. So there's three types of testing: black, gray, and white. They'll go by different names. So this is not the only term you will hear. You'll hear black hat testers for the people themselves, as well as black box testing for the type. Again, you'll hear internal, external, but go with the bullets here as to what's the perspective of the attacker or the tester and the type of testing they're doing. In a black hat, black box scenario, ideally the person has no knowledge or visibility into the environment. Sure, they can go out and Google your website, they can use some tools on the internet to get some basic information, but they really have no idea what your network topology looks like, what operating systems you run, etc. Most, if not all, of their knowledge is going to come from an internet search, because you're not going to tell them when you do this, set up this test. It's going to be the most realistic, but it's not necessarily going to yield the best results. And I put a comment there that this is often due to firewall and SOC involvement. So depending on how much and how quickly they have to test, their tests are going to set off alarms in a SOC, and on firewalls and on intrusion detection, prevention devices, etc. So it's going to be easier to detect that they're there, and then reach out and go, hey, is someone doing a pen test, or is this a valid, attack attempt? But again, it's realistic because they don't have information. They're an outsider. When you move to gray hat and gray box, this one, they're going to have some minor knowledge. So they're going to know a little bit about your environment. They're going to get enough information to make it a successful test. And by successful test, what I mean is black box testing may return the least number of results, but it's almost assuming that they can't get internal access. They're doing it from the external facing side. So maybe you have pretty good external perimeter, firewall, security, etc. in place, but you're not taking into account your people, their accounts that could be hacked, etc. Gray hat and gray box is going to get kind of in that middle range where they know a little bit. You're going to give them some information. You might tell them a little bit about your org structure, your network topology. And I consider this one fairly realistic because they have enough information to try to test out what you've put in place to see if it's really secure or not. You're still going to have issues where the firewall and SOC can detect these things, but at this point, you may want to go and tell your SOC, listen, we're doing the gray box testing. Let it go. We understand it's going to set off alarms and triggers, but we want to see what they're able to do. So it's a pretty realistic test, and it's going to yield some good results. The other end of the spectrum from black hat is white hat. Here, they're going to have extensive knowledge. The whole point is to give them as much information as they want or need. You're going to share details with them because it's the least realistic test. However, it's going to most likely be the most valuable. Here, they're going to be able to test all those internal controls, all those ways where, again, I mentioned earlier, people are saying, well, this isn't really a threat because we've got X, Y, and Z set up. But now they can say, that's great, but what if I did hack one of your users' accounts? Would X, Y, and Z actually prevent me? And I really think that this is the best test that you can do. It's the most thorough. The goal really, in my opinion, should be test security from all aspects. And given that users, user accounts, passwords, MFA, all that type of thing is where most people are attacked, phishing included, why would you only want to see how secure the external perimeter security is when your user is more likely going to let them through the front door? You're going to get the most valuable report. And if you're wanting to walk out of this test with what are all the things I can clean up, how can I make myself secure, then I hate to say it, but you want the most results. You may get a report that's got dozens or hundreds of pages of things that need to be corrected. And while that can be very discouraging, just look at it. At least now you have that information, and now you can start making some positive changes and impacts. If you didn't have that information via the black hat or gray hat testing, you're likely to walk away with a false sense of security. And then if you're hacked later, you're likely going to have executive leadership saying, how did this happen, given you did this testing and you didn't raise any concerns? When we talk about the methods and types, I tried to put them kind of in order as most common to least common. Also, the terminology here is fairly common across organizations and testers, but understand that everything is not listed here. This is really meant to gather 90% of the terms and the results. But you talk about internal, external, or both. So again, this kind of goes back to the white hat, black hat. What kind of knowledge they have, where are they doing the test from? If you will not let them into your network to test, well, then it's definitely just an external test. And you can see with the graphic on the right, there's an external pen tester showing you trying to get into the boundary. And then there's also on the top right, an internal pen test computer where you've let someone in. So it's as if they walked into your organization with their own laptop. Maybe they're a vendor, for example, and you want to see, does the vendor have the ability to attack you? Or what if that vendor's computer was compromised? They connect to your network. What can it do? So you can do one or the other or both. I recommend both. You're already paying these people to be, conduct this test. It's only a small cost more to do both because all the time, the testing, the setup, the rules of engagement that we'll talk about, all that's being done either way. There's network and firewall and web application and website testing. These are a little more specific. Typically you'll get some of this in a general overall pen test, but if you had a very elaborate network with lots of access control lists and lots of security groups, and it's a big organization spread out over multiple entities maybe that were acquired that do things a little bit differently in different countries, et cetera, you may want to pay for a specific network or firewall test. You may, if you develop application code, for example, you're going to want to pay for a specific web application pen test. It's a different set of tools. It's a different set of skills. And you're going to want to test that because it's your code and you need to make sure it's secure. You want to do that for your website as well. There are less common ones like wireless network testing, database net testing, physical, like building. Can I infiltrate your building? Can I use social engineering to get information? You can consider all these, but this should really be applicable to the organization. For example, if you work remote, what would be the reason for a physical pen test? But again, in some cases, this is applicable, like DoD, for example. If you have classified material, this is going to be applicable. So it has its use cases. You just have to determine whether or not that makes sense for you. And then quickly, some of the issues and limitations. You could cause harm to systems. You have to know what you're going to be testing against. You have to know what visibility and connectivity you'll have. Scheduling can be a problem because a lot of times people want you to schedule off hours to not impact or potentially impact people and their work. But remember, that's less accurate than what would really be happening in a real world scenario. And then the fifth one there is the absolute requirement. I would never, ever do a penetration test with any organization that didn't first create a rules of engagement document that outlines specifically what they'll test, when they'll test it, who's testing, what to do if something goes wrong, how to pause, will they stop and tell you if they find something critical immediately? And that's signed off by the organization, so everyone knows the rules for that engagement and you're not caught off guard. Anyone that skips this automatically should be taken out of the running as a vendor to trust. And then cost components. So quickly going over this, whether you do it in-house or you outsource it is going to have a huge impact. Obviously, in-house, you have to have the right people, the tools. It's going to be far more expensive, but depending on the size of your organization, like the last organization I came from, we had a team of testers, but they were testing so many systems all the time that they literally had full-time jobs doing it. It was more cost-effective than outsourcing. For most small to medium businesses, outsourcing is the way to go. You'll have to look at the price of the tools. You can use free ones. They have ones that cost money, but again, some are better than others, and sometimes you get what you pay for. A lot of the open source tools are good, but you don't have vendor support, and you have to have someone who understands how to use them. You've got to consider the price of the tester's time and the opportunity cost. And this goes a lot to do with their knowledge level. Do you want to pay for a beginner, intermediate, or advanced tester? When you start adding things like network, web application, you're getting into the more intermediate to advanced side, you're going to pay more for that resource. If you want to test a database, and so you say, I got a couple databases, I have some networking equipment. Now the team that has to come in may have to bring multiple resources because most people are not highly skilled across multiple domains. So it's not uncommon to bring 5 different people in to do different aspects of testing. They'll each bill a certain number of hours, and the cumulative effect of their hours, their skill level, and their hourly rate itself will dictate how much you pay. The type of test will obviously play a role. Some are going to take longer, some are more difficult. Again, goes back to the resources. And then how stealthy do you want to be? The longer you want it to take, the more stealthier you want it to be. You have to understand these resources are tied up, and that's going to cost you money. It will return a more realistic result, but at what cost? If you can do the whole test in 5 days or a month, 5 days is probably still going to be good enough. You'll get better results at the month, but at 4 times the cost. And most people just can't justify that. And then will you test application code? If so, is it going to be static testing, dynamic, both? Again, these are all questions and things you have to consider. Clearly, if you don't have a database, you don't have custom code, you don't want to test your website, then you can eliminate all of those from the scoping. The other thing here too is from a cost perspective, as I said, plan to spend anywhere on the low end, let's say $2,500 up to $100,000. Now, small and medium-sized businesses, the $100,000 is probably not applicable. Large enterprises, you could easily spend $100,000. You could have 5 to 10 resources in there, each with 10 to 15 years of experience for multiple weeks of testing. So when you work with someone, if you're going to do it that way and you have an elaborate testing scheme, just find out what the hourly bill rates are, and then you can try to figure out how many hours they need and how much you're willing to spend. When you do it with someone like Ntiva, and feel free to reach out to us for information on our penetration testing thing, it's going to be a lower cost because we're going to use do it over a smaller time frame with a smaller subset of tools, and we're going to do the most broad testing that we can, and we're not getting down into like the application testing level. So that's going to save you a lot of time and money and still identify the vast majority of your exploitable vulnerabilities. But again, figure just for most companies, you're going to spend anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 as a minimum. I don't know most companies that would come in any cheaper. And again, it always goes back to, well, would it be cheaper to buy it myself? Well, again, the cost of the tool might be cheaper, but then you have to have someone who knows how to use the tools. And then what do they do with the rest of their time? Because a single company is not going to sit there and pen test itself all day, every day. So I hope this was helpful. If there are any questions, please let me know, and I will try to address them here in our last couple minutes. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. So again, I appreciate you taking your 30 minutes of your lunch to spend it with me. If you need any more information, feel free to reach out to Ntiva and let us know. Thank you.